Hello to all. I'm here today in the Tier 10 French tech tree cruiser, the Henri IV. We're here today on 10 Tears of the Desert Standard Battle, so gonna be a bit of a grind, but at least does favor the Henri IV's strengths somewhat. We're on patch 0.10.2, so or 0.10.1 actually, sorry. So post-captain rework, so some things have changed, but not really that much for the Henri IV. Now, Henri IV, fairly large cruiser, as you can maybe tell, but unlike some of the other large cruisers of the Russian variety that are in the game, the Henri IV is not quite that heavily armored. Fairly substantial hit point pool at 53,000, but still nothing to write home about. But, sorry, reading that comment on the side. Really, not too much has changed. Henri IV, large ship, fairly large protection. I am running the legendary module. Now, the Henri IV used to have fairly powerful engine power. This was nerfed somewhat. They'd nerfed the engine spooling, which is the rate of acceleration. So you used to be able to do something called speed juking, throttle jockeying, whatever you want to call it, with the application of speed boost with start and stop, but this has been nerfed somewhat, and people since then have not enjoyed the Henri IV as much. As well, there have been ships introduced into the meta, such as the Venezia, which is an equally large ship, but it has much better engine power and has the ability to kind of smoke at will, and more importantly has extremely fast railgun shells with basically no shell travel time, more or less. That heavily outrate the Henri IV, targeted by 3 people here with my priority target. Still opting for priority target personally. Now I'm taking a rather dangerous turn. Now the Yamato has fired already, but it has been a while. Hindenburg firing up on me as well. There's that Yamato salvo, Petropavlov salvo as well. I'm kind of halfway through my turn at this period. Won't be able to finish the turn before the Petro shells arrive, but should be able to dodge the Yami shells without too much difficulty. But you can see, not the most heavily armored ship in the world, as the Yamato puts 10,000 into my hull. Playing at range. Now I do have that legendary module, which is extending my range, allowing me to be a little more effective at that 28.6. Still nothing to write home about though. You can see giving a fair amount of broadside to get those guns to bear, so I do have to be a bit careful. The distance that I'm playing at, however, does allow me to remain fairly effective. Oh, there's a destroyer. So one of the key features of the French cruisers, including the Henri IV, is this main battery reload booster, which allows you to put in large amounts of burst damage now. These are fairly heavy HE shells, 240mm shells, which actually mean that the AP rounds do overmatch certain types of ships, such as the Minotaur and other lightly armored super lights like the Smolensk and Colbert. Not shooting at any of those targets at the moment, however, so just using the HE. You can see the shells have fairly high shell drag. Popping that boost there, we are able to successfully dispatch that Marceau who wanders a bit too close to my Holland. Staying at range from those battleships, that Yamato continuing to harass me, but with this speed boost running I can start and stop and wiggle my ship, hopefully. Not too much. He overleads me thanks to a bit of the start-stop that we've been doing. And now he's behind an island, not sure. He probably can still actually shoot at me because of the fair distance at which we are away. Now I was doing about 34 knots before. Oh, there's a salvo coming. I'm going to be kind of straight broadside, so hopefully this doesn't hit me too hard. We'll see if his lead's on point. We are fortunate enough to accelerate out of the way. Now as I stay in the straight line, we should be able to accelerate up to our maximum speed. My detectability at 15.9, by the way, kind of poor. My air detectability, likewise, is similarly not that great. Now with the Henri IV, you do kind of want to be firing your guns this whole time. Your reload is nothing special, but it is quite alright. The point of reload, or the point of taking the legendary module, is that it's a bit of an improved reload module that also gives you some range in addition. I'm fairly broadside here, but I'm quite shielded from most of the heavy AP targets. And if I occupy this position here, I can actually harass the Yamato from over the mountain. You can see my shells aren't particularly floaty or flat. I'm kind of somewhere in between American and, say, Russian. That would be flatter. But playing at this long distance, I don't have any utility like radar or hydro, so not too much to do here. So I'm fairly safe to just sit here and occupy this space on the far flank. Not landing too many shots. You can see because of the fair distance, my marksmanship could be improved somewhat. Dispersion also not particularly impressive. Wow, these are some impressively poor dispersion salvos, to be honest. Finally do manage to land some shells, but even with 240mm shells, the penetration is nothing special, still the standard 1/6 HE pen formula, so that 57mm Yamato deck resisting my HE shells somewhat. Now the AP shells on the Henri IV are fairly powerful, about as powerful as the Moskva's 220s with her high velocity guns, just thanks to that heavy shell. And oh, the AA is fairly heavy too. Those shells are coming in toward me. Hopefully I can turn in time, but a bit late. Do take some heavy penetration damage. Let's see if these midway bombers do come into our AA range. I do opt for defensive fire because we stay so far out. Don't really have too many scenarios where we're pushing into torpedoes in a typical game. Only managed to trim one extra plane, but not much I can do about that. You can see my team is slowly encroaching after burning down several ships on that flank. Yamato giving me some trouble. I'm kind of waiting, playing very conservatively. Fairly low damage total so far. Waiting for my speed boost to come back up. And you can see me playing on the border of the map because I am kind of vulnerable. Let's see if I can use that AP, by the way. Now, I have fairly poor rearward angles. That Petro is the one I was kind of scared of. Gonna speed boost through. Hopefully he won't get punished. One of the ships shooting us is that Hindenburg, which is a lot less problematic. He does, however, manage to squeeze off one salvo, and with that American bounce angles, you can see my AP doing fairly good damage. But he does put 7k into my side in kind. Switch back to those heavy HE. Hindenburg putting some good pen damage into my side as well. Hindenburg also kind of a long-range HE spammer. We're kind of leaving him unmolested at the moment. Petropavlos does light up again. Gonna see if we can finish him off with our long-range HE shells. Now, unlike the Hindenburg with his tall rifles with quarter pen, we have much better HE shells per shell, but our reload is quite poor. Even with my adrenaline rush kicking in, with Henri, the legendary captain or special captain of the French nation, not particularly compelling. Oh, okay, Yamato firing upon me. I was going to consider turning in, but you can see, even at long ranges, you do have to be respectful of these battleships. You can see the shells screaming in from the horizon now, and I'm still straddling the border as the Henri IV is kind of forced to do in these kinds of standard battle games. After this, hopefully we'll be able to feature a domination game, which is, you know, the actual game mode of World of Warships, and hopefully be a little more effective. Gonna get off this border here and slide forward. Now with the engine boost running, the Henri IV does reach a rather nice top speed of just about 40 knots, which makes her one of the faster tier 10 cruisers, able to run down some amount of her competitors and even some destroyers. At least in a straight line. Acceleration-wise, however, not the greatest. And her turning circle is fairly massive since she is a large vessel. .42.5, 43 knots almost here, but I'm about to touch my detectability thanks to that legendary module. Start off with some HE into that Thunderer. You can see fairly floaty at range, to the point where I missed that salvo. Don't want to give too much broadside. Don't know who's targeting me yet. Could be the Yamato potentially. He's on fire and burning, so it's probably not him. Do manage to score fire onto that Thunderer who is retreating. I think that Yamato did fire at us. You can see those shells screaming in. He just managed to clip us, but the spaced armor does protect us from the Yamato shells, but those Thunderer shells do manage to find the Henry IV's fairly large raised citadel. Now, if I recall, I think I did set a fire on this Thunderer who's very unhappy with us, so he's determinedly spitting out AP shells at me. At this range, though, plenty of time to angle out and away and dodge those shells. You can see that fairly static carrier target there. So if I just demonstrate with this reload booster, the HE DPM with the reload booster up is actually fairly respectable. Kind of almost sitting on a Des Moines reload, but with much more effective long-range performance. Carrier deck protecting it from much of my shells, however. Preferentially shooting the carrier at the moment just because it's a lot easier to deal with, but that Vermont and that Hindenburg are also fairly valid targets. Switching to armor piercing because the Hindenburg's giving a fair bit of side. However, with these slow shells, it is actually kind of easy for enemy cruisers, especially to angle out and away. That guy looks like he might show us some side. Gonna pop my defensive fire here. There's a Vermont in close proximity, so we can use our armor piercing on that. Now the Henry IV does have a pair of torpedo launchers per side. Not the most impressive AP salvo there. There we go, 5k, that's more like it. So, with 240mm shells, you can put out some fairly impressive damage. In a good salvo, not able to show off the most amount of damage there since that target kind of died on the way. But as I said, these shells do have Moskva penetration, but they also suffer from the same problem as Moskva AP, in that they don't have any special penetration angles or anything. So as a result, even slight angling will cause them to ricochet, unfortunately. We're just chasing what's left of the enemy team. But the Henry IV is at least fairly effective in a chase. You don't want to be pushing in. You don't have an armored bow or anything, but in terms of chasing an enemy that is retreating from you, showing you their sterns, not necessarily firing their full broadsides at you, the Henry IV can be a fairly effective ship. I've burned through pretty much all my heals in this particular match. You can see, because of the lack of armor and the relatively squishy hull, the Henry IV does tend to take a lot of damage, which does result in you burning through a whole bunch of your heals. Pretty good fire chance on the shells, however, so maybe we can snipe some carrier kills here. You've seen me throughout this game, pop my AA, and intermittently chew up a couple of planes, but nothing too impressive in particular. Oh, enemy carrier is going to get slapped out of existence by that Republic that was with me on the flank. And you can see the Henry IV, just like the Republic, and just like many French ships, to be honest, does operate fairly effectively on the flank, thanks to its high speed. Gonna pop my reload booster here. Don't have quite all my rifles online. Now I could switch to armor piercing here. It's giving me a fair bit of side, but I anticipate he's gonna turn in. Okay, he didn't, so let's see if this AP salvo can land. You can see the shells have a fair bit of hang time. And we do score enough to score a frag. Now there's a Holland somewhere in front of me, but I am a fairly fast ship, and with an Audacious in front of me, I would imagine that the Holland player will torp a Audacious over torping me. I am a fairly fast and maneuverable target. but only time will tell. Hopefully, I will have the response time to bring my guns online and chew him up if I see him, like so. Fairly long reload even at this low HP. At this point, sitting at 7.5 seconds. With the legendary module, you get it down to about 10 seconds, so. Since this Jedi meta does involve ships sitting very far at the back, the Henry IV does want a bit of extra range over its stock range. I believe it starts at about 18, 17 kilometers of range, so the extra range does end up being quite helpful usually. Not landing too many shells in the Howland, but you can see my shells, my individual HE shells are actually quite heavy. And in a straight line, I am actually faster than this Holland, so I can technically box him in and run him down. Don't think I quite got the right lead there, so we're going to pop our reload booster. Those shells should be enough to kill him. Pick up another frag as we glide across the edge of the map. You'll note that we started up here and we went around the border. This is pretty classic Henry IV gameplay into the ultra late game, however, so. In this kind of scenario where you're slowly running down targets and you're taking individual, not even trades, but you're just in pursuit of kills, the Henry IV is a formidable boat, and we're going to wrap this one up at this point. So a pretty clean victory here. 127,000 damage for with 159 shell hits, 8 planes shot down, 3 incapacitations, 3 kills, 8 fires, 1 target hit, and 1 spotting ribbon. And team score wide, a pretty casual 2200. If we look at the damage distribution, mostly HE, because of the not improved nature of the Henry IV's HE shells and its inability to penetrate angled targets. You are going to be reaching for those HE shells a lot. Those 240mm shells are fairly large, so they do have a good amount of penetration, penetrating 40mm of armor at base, even without any modifications. Now, these 240s do allow you to overmatch certain ships, such as the Minotaur. So if you see Minotaur, Smolensk, Colbert, anything really with that thin 16mm bow, the Henry IV does actually have large enough guns to overmatch those bows, so its AP can be fairly applicable in terms of anti-cruiser roles if you see the situation arise. Now, as for the Henry IV herself, she's fairly unarmored, as you can see, 25mm bow and stern, and then just 30mm on to the central section. Now 30 will allow you to bounce 406mm shells, but these days with the amount of Thunderers and Kremlins in the matchmaking queue, as well as Georgias and Ohios, well, the 30mm will bounce some battleship shells, but not that many. However, if you strip away the outer sections, you will note that there are continual layers of armor as you strip it away. So beneath that 30mm deck, for example, if I strip away the deck, there's another 80mm section and 45mm section citadel plating beneath the 30mm plating. So the Henry IV does have that French spaced armor, which will absorb some amount of shell and prevent them from necessarily being citadels. Okay, I don't know why the client just did that. So module-wise, at the moment, I am running a legendary module, which goes into slot 5, the concealment module. But before that, slot 1, main armaments, your guns are going to be your main form of munitions, so you want to protect your guns. Slot 2, if you have this engine boost, the Henry IV really does benefit from having your engine boost active, so putting on an engine boost modification, if you have one, is fairly nice to do. If you don't have that, engine room protection will suffice. Slot 3, I opt for turret traverse. Now the Henry IV's accuracy at long range, as you saw, is not particularly impressive. However, her turret traverse is also quite sluggish, so I prefer to put on the turret traverse modification here. Slot 4, propulsion module. On some cruisers, especially open water cruisers like the Henry IV, I will take rudder shift, but after they nerfed the propulsion, I have switched back to propulsion module on the Henry. It would be nice to get the rudder shift down. It's not particularly fast at 11.8, but propulsion to kind of get some amount of speed juking while your engine boost is running is fairly nice. Slot 5, now this is normally where most ships would take concealment, and prior to getting legendary module unlocked I would take concealment. But since I am running legendary module, I am running this improved main battery loading mechanism. So what it does is it gives you an additional 8% firing range and 12% reload, so kind of a second reload module. Reload module gives you 12%. However, in exchange, you cannot take your -10 concealment from concealment module, and it further worsens your concealment by another 10% on top. So that even with concealment module, the Henri IV has a pretty colossal 13-ish kilometer detection range, and this puts you up to almost 16, so adding just about 2 to 3 kilometers of detectability. So you're definitely trading something for that extra range, but I find that without the module, your range is about 10% less, so just about 2 kilometers less, so about 18 kilometers, and while it is pretty effective, with the way the meta is shaping up with all the ships sitting at the back, it sometimes does feel fairly short, and the only other way to get range really is to run range module. And the Henri IV actually has a fairly long base reload. You can see even with this 24% boost to my reload, I'm still sitting at 10-second base reload. So without these buffs to my reload, I'm looking at about 14-second reload. So taking range module would keep me stuck at that 14 seconds with about 21-ish kilometers of range, but not too much else to speak for my damage. And the Henri IV really is a ship that needs to win the game through damage. You don't have utility to smoke out radars or anything, and she's not particularly good at pushing, so really the only effective way she has of getting through a game, much like the Zao, is to kill her way to a victory. Now I'm running a 19-point captain. I'm using one of the armoured brothers. If you have them, the improved adrenaline rush is pretty spicy, as well as the improved expert marksman. So I'm running a fairly pedestrian build, using 17 out of 19 of my points. So grease the gears into priority target, into probably adrenaline rush first, into concealment expert, following up with superintendent, and then for now I'm taking top grade gunner. Now the top grade gunner is fairly nice, especially with the legendary module, because my base detectability of 15.9 is so large that anytime something's within 16 kilometers of my range, I am going to have this extra 8% reload boost from my top grade gunner active. So this is actually one of the few ships where top grade gunner is very good. Now if you really want to go full memes, you can go into heavy HE and SAP shells, but I personally found that this pushes you to about almost 20 kilometers of detectability, and I personally have found that it's uncomfortably large amount of spotting range. Now I have 17 points spent and 4 points left in my captain build, so what I would probably do here is go for expert loader plus heavy AP shells to a very standard kind of super cruiser build. This is a build that you can run on pretty much all your super cruisers, so if I flip over to my Puerto Rico, for example, since this is one of my 21-point super cruiser captains, and I look at my Halsey, who is built for American super cruisers, you can see this is pretty much the standard build that I would go for on the Henri IV. Expert marksman into priority target, into adrenaline rush, into concealment expert, back into superintendent, and then I'm opting for the 8% reload over the constant 5% AP shell damage, since you're not always using your AP shells, you're using your HE more, so top grade gunner, then AP shells and expert loader. I might actually even go for expert loader, or gun feeder as it's called now, before I go into heavy AP shells. It's really that important. So that was a standard battle where you kind of get to have the luxury of chasing around the border to hunt down your targets. But let's throw it back into the matchmaker and see if we can do a little more. What am I running for flags? Just mostly these flags. Now the Henri IV does actually have a fairly good fire chance. If you look here at her shells, at 24% per shell. So what some people have done in the past is that they have taken IFHE. What IFHE does is that it pushes your 240mm shells with their 40mm penetration up to 50mm penetration, which allows you to pen German armored deck and also Russian supercruiser or Russian large cruiser deck with its 50mm penetration bracket. However, it does not allow you to beat the 60mm armor of the Sovietsky Soyuz or the Kremlin, or the 57 of the Yamato, or the, I believe it's 57 of the Vermont as well. Let me just take a look. So there have definitely been past metas where taking IFHE has been pretty nice. I don't know why I can't look at the armor scheme without being in port like this. So 51 here, so it's actually just a little too much, I believe. Because you get exactly 50 with the Henry with IFHE. And in exchange you get that, you turn that 24% fire chance, which is fairly good, into a fairly bad 12% thanks to your low reload and relatively low shell count. So it is an option if you want to try it and have a little more universal HE damage, but I personally do not recommend it. Anyhow, let's throw it back into the matchmaker and see if we can find a domination game where we can chase our way over to a victory. Henry IV personally I found to be one of my, I wouldn't say favorites for tier 10s, but it is one that I enjoy. She's a fairly large cruiser that doesn't feel particularly overpowering thanks to the nerfed ability to speed boost. Oh, there's an American super light here, by the way, in Austin that I can AP through the bow, as well as an Iden who I can AP through the bow. So if that opportunity comes up, I will try and point it out. Shokaku, and a fairly large open roaming map on Sleeping Giant, so I should have plenty of room. Now I've spawned here in the center. I'm probably actually going to swing over to A. Already have two cruisers over there, a Worcester and a Wukong, a Charles Martel that is very bad. Whereas I have a Goliath and Des Moines here. Plenty of room on Sleeping Giant for the roam around. Carrier is going to spot me fairly early, but there's no real battleship threat, and while this does mean that I'm not going to have too many battleships to farm, so you're not going to see some insane damage numbers, it also means I have fewer threats from range, which means I can really leverage my large size to bully my way in. Furthermore, in terms of enemy cruiser lineup, of the high tier cruisers, the Moskva is not particularly well equipped to deal with me. Now, if I don't have IFHE, so I can't bully straight through his 50mm armor, but he's fairly large and sluggish, and I can punish if he gives too much side with that main battery reload booster, which is an incredibly powerful consumable. Likewise, the Hindenburg, like you saw last game, is kind of a very similar ship that trades the speed of the hull for having a little better armor and having more general purpose firepower all the time, since her DPM is actually quite high with 12 rifles and a fairly good reload. Carrier's gonna spot me, don't really care about that though, I'm not exactly a stealth cruiser. Just sector here while he glides into the edge. Getting off a very, very small burst of damage. We know we're facing a Hindenburg, Ostergotland, and a Salem. Now, the Salem's going to be a fairly tricky target. He actually does out-DPM me by a fair bit. Not sure if that Burgon shot at me. Oh, he did. I wasn't paying attention, so if I take a large sum of damage, as I did there, well, my apologies. This is why you do have to be very aware. Those battleships, especially when there's more of them, are extremely annoying, so there you go there. I guess I got an adrenaline rush boost. My 25mm bow and stern are not going to be ricocheting those Burgon shells, but my 30mm midsection can, so I just want to catch as many on that belt armor as possible. This guy being obnoxious, as I mentioned. Battleships, super annoying, and I managed to beach myself, which is a bit embarrassing. We do manage to score a fire with our 24% fire chance, but he is going to escape out of range more than likely. Now I have fairly respectable range. You can see even with double turret traverse, both the module and the skill, not exactly world-ending turret traverse. The majority of the enemy team is there, including both their battleships, so pushing through onto this side would be fairly easy, but it looks like the enemy team's already running, so I'm actually going to go through the center and cut them off. This is one thing that the incredibly high speed of the Henri IV allows it to do. The Ostergotland appears to have gone into the center. That or one of the enemy destroyers went through the center into the cap, but based on the fact that the Des Moines managed to get himself torped, I would anticipate that he quite possibly slid through. That Kagero is the one spotting me, by the way. Not sure what's up with that. Do manage to squeeze off some shots, still looking to cut off that Salem. Shokaku gliding over my Thunderer. Do manage to put some shells into there. And there is an Austin. Now if you remember, I was talking about how my shells can actually punch straight through his bow. So we're gonna main battery reload booster here. He's making a run for the smoke. Don't have all of my turrets online, but not gonna always have an opportunity to necessarily get shells into him. That Salem as well in the center is gonna be giving a fair bit of broadside. You can see he's pinched against that island. It's something to look out for, so fairly good opportunity to try and get some AP damage. Now I don't want to get trapped against this island either beside me. Unfortunately he does angle enough so as to avoid much of the damage I would otherwise inflict onto him. Looks like he's considering a full turn. Austin's over there potentially able to harass me with his sap and HE. You can see at range my shells are fairly slow. I'm giving a fair amount of broadside, but this is because there aren't too many battleships in this match right now. Enemy Akazuki eating shit over there. Not even looking at the Salem's shells really, because I'm not concerned. I'm so far away that he can't really effectively hit me. Targeted by 2 now. Rather obnoxious. Certainly. But I'm gonna migrate over and control the center. That enemy George is still there. And is dark, so I do have to be careful. And now, if I can get over onto this flank with a battleship and a fairly static cruiser in the Moskva and a Hindenburg at almost close to maximum range, should be in a fairly good position. That Austin over there at fairly close range as well. With my reload booster back up, I should be able to punish him fairly effectively. Don't want to tunnel too hard, but it's a fairly good opportunity for me. So I can punch shells straight through his bow. That should kill him. Guns trained onto the Georgia now. You can see Citadel straight through the bow. Not sure if he angled or not, but now we're in a fairly effective position. You can see the Georgia's just inside my 15-9 detection, which means I'm getting that extra 8% reload boost from having a ship inside my spotting range. And now at this range I can quite leisurely harass this Georgia, who's already on fire. Now with my 40mm of HE pen, you can see I'm dealing quite heavy damage to him, defeating his 38mm of midsection armor, which would normally be quite protective. But in this case, it's not going to benefit him very much. I'm going to pop my first heal at this point. Now the Moskva doesn't have too much trouble hitting me at this range, especially if I'm going to sit still like that, so I'm going to pull some distance. But I'm kiting away now, which is the ideal for the Henri IV. This guy, the Georgia, already fired previously. Now his 457s are kind of scary, dealing some chip damage to me, but I know he's recently been on fire. So I'm going to see if I can kill him by setting him repeatedly on fire. So, onto my last few reload booster charges, which is why Superintendent is quite nice on this ship. Getting a double fire there. I'm going to turn my attention to this Hindenburg. Pulling the range. Now I'm pulling toward the border, but I don't have a choice as a kiting cruiser. Getting some fairly effective damage onto this Hindenburg. Don't want the range to open up too much, want to keep my reload bonus. Get my speed boost running. This will more effectively allow me to duck and dodge. Sticking to HE, he's not giving me quite enough broadside to make use of the AP, and I don't have my reload booster up anyway. Reload booster really a nice DPM surprise. Double fire. Now I am leading in HP now, but I still am not confident enough to turn in. That Georgia, unfortunately, did survive my fires. Gonna pop my heal. We're gonna continue to trade, right? So stay on it. Moskva's still trading with us in a bit of an uneven 2v1. I'm the only ship on this flank, so unsurprisingly, they are trading with me. Playing with my speed, accelerating to get out of the way of some shells. Nice, slow down here. Looks like those fires on the Hindenburg did tick out. I really do need to kill him before I can turn my ship around, so. You can see here dodging the shells very casually. Oh, he GCP'd this time, so. Managed to score another follow-up fire. That high fire chance again coming into play. Double fire. Maybe we can triple fire him even. I've kind of left the range of the Moskva, who's moved on. Triple fire. You can see this DPM's fairly monstrous, but you have to sit at the back when you're being pushed. I probably can turn around at this point. I've done enough damage to him that I can re-engage, and I can harass this Georgia from over the island at 17 kilometers. Enemy anchorage. I'm outside of the anchorage's range unless he's taking a spotter plane. So I'm fairly confident. I have a heal. I'm a much heavier ship. Georgia is shooting at me, however. If I close the distance on this island, though, even with his relatively lazy American arcs, he won't really be able to engage me. Now, the anchorage does have Fletcher torpedoes and a fairly powerful Buffalo AP broadside. So I do have to keep track of him. Do score a fire onto that Georgia. Gonna continue to harass him until he's no longer a target for me. Double fire. Gonna pop my heal here, since I do know I'm gonna be engaging the anchorage. Anchorage does make the mistake of giving me a bit of side. Only have my bow guns ready, but my reload booster is coming up. Still have some reload booster charges, so still definitely worth popping. Anchorage has a fairly exposed citadel, and you can see that AP is no joke. Now George is going to be charging me. So let's see what he wants to do. Now I cannot bounce any of his shells, but he only has 4 shells forward. Kind of wish I had the broadside, the reload booster now to burst him down with HE shells, but my HE shells do damage him all over his hull. So as long as he doesn't fire another salvo, we should kill him before he can kill me. And there's an easy witherer. There's an enemy carrier hull in the horizon. And my long range is going to allow me to reach out and engage him. 4,000 HP left. I am scared of that Moskva. He is engaging me, for sure. I'm gonna shoot him for as long as possible. This island is gonna shield those rocket planes from hitting me, but it's also gonna make it a little awkward for him. Certainly. Just gonna pop my defensive fire early. Make things as awkward as possible. Hopefully he doesn't kill me. I'm not that saturated, so he could very easily do so. Just shave 3k off of me. Shokaku hull does die. And now there's a Moskva hull that might kill me on the way in. Because remember, my turning circle is not fantastic. He does have AP loaded. And I am going to unfortunately drop in this game. But you could see I was forced a bit to the back and not able to do too much. My Sashio at full health still kind of circling around the back. But still, well, 4 kills to my name. Now probably not too much contribution to Capzone. As you can see, I kind of just sailed around the map shooting my guns, but that is the nature of the Henri IV. Not as effective. In the Venezia, you can be much more confident about pushing in, and in the Zao, you can operate much more close to the caps thanks to her superior concealment, but the Henri IV has neither of these things. Instead, she has high explosive and relatively okay DPM in range. So as a result, she does end up having relatively poor game impact, which leads to you circling at the back like so. Still, 190,000 damage. So not too terrible a game. I think we acquitted ourselves quite nicely. relatively speaking, this team does not appear to have been particularly effective. Lost one of my Des Moines pretty early on to an Ostergotland torpedo salvo, so that's obviously kind of embarrassing, and there's still this basically untouched full HP Edinburgh sailing for the center and such. This Burgoyne, who took a nice big pot shot at us early on, managed to survive relatively unscathed as well, and this Asashio, who could very easily win this gun duel, to be quite frank, is not firing his guns until just now. All he has to do is kind of slow down. Neither of them are particularly effective. The Ostergotland's a respectable gunboat, but not a fantastic one. If this Asashio mitigates the amount of damage he takes with his excellent Japanese HE shells, he can definitely win this trade. You can see him taking large chunks out of the Ostergotland every salvo. But he's not doing a very great job in like mitigating the amount of damage he takes from the Ostergotland, so as a result he goes down. And that'll be the game. So, it is what it is. That's just the Henri IV at it. We did get an arsonist and high caliber nevertheless. 180 shells for 190,000 damage. 5 aircraft shot down, 5 incapacitations, 4 kills, 14 fires, 3 citadels, and 4 secondary target hits. 1,500 on the losing team, so multiply that by 1.5. Sophie won about 2,250 base experience, so pretty similar performance to our last match, just the distribution of ships that we shot at. In this particular, most of our damage coming from this Georgia, which we did 80,000 damage to, and this Hindenburg, meaning that because we did less destroyer damage, well, we have slightly less base experience. 100,000 of it being HE damage, 36,000 being AP damage, so you can see why taking that AP damage skill is not too important until later on, and 50,000 in fires. So yeah, that's the Henri IV. Unfortunately, we weren't able to pull out a second win in this domination game, but the Henri IV is not particularly good at domination games because, well, it's not a very effective ship around caps. As I hopefully demonstrated, you saw that first salvo from the Burgoyne, so you can just imagine if there were 4 battleships per side, well, the game would have been a little tougher to get close early on, and I would have been even more reticent. But there you have it. Henri IV on 10.2. Still a decent cruiser, but definitely not a meta breaker by any means at this point in time. I hope you enjoyed, and I will catch you all later. Cheers.